حي على الفلاح.
So as you know, we're going to be talking about the signs before the Day of Judgment. In order to talk about the signs before the Day of Judgment, you really have to talk about some guidelines. Because without the guidelines, anybody can be anybody. And that's why it's so important to always cover the ground rules before you start speaking about the signs before the Day of Judgment. I want to start off with a hadith in Sahih Muslim. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the best day on which the sun has risen is Friday. On that day Adam was created, and he was entered into Al-Jannah on that day. وَفِيهِ أُخْرِجَ مِنْهَا, and he was also taken out of Al-Jannah on a Friday. And the last hour, yani the Day of Judgment, will be on a Friday. So what if, let's say you have a roommate, you wake up Wednesday, you ask him, did you pray Fajr? He tells you no. You say, okay, why didn't you pray Fajr? He says, because I know the Day of Judgment is not going to be today. Today is Wednesday. The Day of Judgment, according to the hadith in Sahih Muslim, will be on a Friday. So if it's on a Friday, it's not today, I'm safe. Here you would tell him, don't worry about the big Day of Judgment, worry about your Day of Judgment. Because the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever dies, his day of resurrection has already started. Look at this in Sahih Bukhari. A man asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the Day of Judgment. Ya Rasulullah, mata as-sa'a? When will the hour be? Now, he lives, thousands of years before the Day of Judgment, and he's not going to be alive when the big Day of Judgment happens. And the Prophet doesn't even know the date. But suppose he knew it and told it to him, would he benefit from it? So that's why that's not your concern here. The Prophet shifted his concern to something more beneficial. He said, may Allah have mercy on you. What have you prepared for it? That's the big deal. If you know what day the Day of Judgment will be, it doesn't benefit you. What benefits you now is how do you prepare for it? And the fact that your Day of Judgment can begin at any time, that is really your concern. And that's why it's interesting. In one narration, the companion said the Prophet ﷺ would talk about the Dajjal so much that we'd think he is hiding right behind those trees. And then another time, and Nabi ﷺ came out and he found the companion sitting talking about the Dajjal. And then he tells them, should I tell you of something that I'm more concerned for you than the Dajjal? And hidden shirk is when someone shows off or does an act of worship to show off to people, not to Allah Azza wa Jal. So look at what the balance here. Sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would talk about it like it's right there. And then the next time he wants your focus not to be something that you probably will not encounter, but to focus on something that will affect you and your life. The first and most important thing. Now, we're going to talk about the minor and major signs. And I'm going to talk about just maybe a few of the minor signs and use them primarily in examples. And then we're really going to be focusing on the major signs before the Day of Judgment. And for those who wanted something on a lighter note, look, some people are saying these are the ends of times, or this is the end of the world, or Mahdi is going to show up any minute. The Mahdi is always going to show up at any minute. And every generation always believed, or many generations believed that the Mahdi is going to show up in their times. There was one of the scholars, and this is hundreds of years before us, he was certain that the Mahdi will show up during his time, and he used to tell his students, when you see the Mahdi, tell him I said Assalamu alaikum. I know that if Mahdi might come in my lifetime, if I die, he will certainly come in your lifetime. If you see him, give him salams. And this was hundreds of years ago. We know people today who believe, and I'm talking about legitimate, knowledgeable students of knowledge, who believe the Mahdi will show up at our times. Or the Dajjal will show up at our times. But there's many things that happen before the Dajjal shows up. And most all of them have not happened. And things that happen before the Mahdi shows up, and they haven't happened either. So what we have to do with the signs of the hour, the major and minor signs, and I'm going to explain in a little bit the difference between the two. Number one, you have to believe all the signs, as long as they're from an authentic source, meaning they're from the Quran or from the authentic Sunnah, then you have to believe. That's your only obligation. The fact that I believe something doesn't mean I have to know the inner workings of it and I have to explain it to everybody. I believe in the beast. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the dabba. We brought out a beast from the earth that speaks to people. So that's in the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned it in the authentic hadith. Now, my job is to believe in the emergence of the beast. Now, someone might come to me and say, so you believe, you're Muslim, you believe in that? Okay, now explain to me. What species is it? What is this beast that speaks languages? And how is it under the ground? And where are its parents? And how does it eat? And how long has it been underground? And where is it right now? Why can't we find it? That's not my job. So to make life easy, your job is to believe only, not to have a thorough explanation and give you like what kind of species it's from and give all, So that's not your job. Number one, your job is to believe in that which you understand, and more importantly, to believe in that which you don't understand. Because that's when the real challenge comes. Everybody can believe what they understand. But when you don't understand something and it's authentic, here are you going to believe or are you not going to believe? But there's going to be a time when the sun will rise from the west. Some people try to explain it and say, okay, when the sun rising from the west, it's not possible that the earth will spin the other way. So the sun rising from the west, meaning the light of Islam growing in the west and rising from the west. And it sounds promising, but here's a very big problem with it. One of the clear things when the sun rises from the west is that Allah does not accept anyone's tawbah anymore. So if Islam is growing in the west, why can't I make tawbah? It doesn't make sense, right? It has to fit. It has to fit all the descriptions. But if you don't understand something, it's not a reason to say it's not authentic or I don't believe it simply because I don't comprehend it. It's the world of the unseen. That's the nature of the world of the unseen. If you could fathom and explain every aspect of it and even see it, then it wouldn't be unseen. Another mistake people make is that they try to interpret every sign according to our present world today. And people are always guilty of that. So basically, one of the minor signs is that time passes quickly. So some people said, okay, that means there will be less barakah in time. Others said the day will get shorter. Now others said time passing quickly. In the old days, a lot of times they would refer to a distance using time. So they'll say, this person is the distance of 3 days, for example. They used to measure distance by days, by time. So with time now passing quickly, some scholars said that's means of transportation or faster means of transportation. So what used to take 3 days, the journey of 3 days now can take you a few hours, or sometimes even less than an hour. If you're on a plane, even on a car, a journey of days on camelback, just a few hours and you're there and you're back again. So they're saying, look, here time passing quickly can mean faster means of transportation, or it can actually mean less barakah, less blessing in your day, so the hours pass and you don't get much done. The point is that this is a sign that could have been understood one way, and it also could have been understood according to the changes in our times. But not everything has to match our times. I'll give you an example. An-Nabi ﷺ mentioned in the hadith that the hour will not be established until predatory animals speak to people. Yani lions, tigers, and it will not be one incident or two, but a number of them. It's a common thing that these animals now are speaking to people. Now here, let's look at the rule we mentioned earlier. What if someone says that's not possible? Animals don't talk and wolves don't talk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did He not create animals that can speak? And you'll say yes. Not just parrots, there are other kinds of birds that can speak. So that's the first thing. Well, wolves don't speak. Of course wolves don't speak. That's what makes it a sign before the Day of Judgment. When wolves speak, it's a big deal. So that's the first thing the hadith mentions. Then it mentions that a man will talk to the tip of his whip. And some argue that the whip will talk back. Because if you just talk to your whip, you're just crazy. There's no sign there. But if your whip talks back to you, then that's an inanimate object speaking, and that's a major sign. And then it says, a man's thigh will inform him of what his family did in his absence. So people in our day and age, when they hear that, what do they understand immediately? Cell phones. Where do you keep your cell phone? Right here in your pocket, which is right near your thigh. And you pick it up and you call your family at home and they tell you what happened while you were gone. So khalas, that's the end of that. Okay, but a number of things here. One, it could be the cell phone, but we cannot confirm and write it off as it is the cell phone for sure, because it could be something else that will happen in the future. Why? Because number one, like the cell phone is not such a miracle that it would be placed in the same hadith as wolves speaking and inanimate objects speaking, and then you calling your and it's not even your thigh telling you really. It's your wife herself telling you, or your husband. When you pick up your phone, the device connects you to them and they tell you what happened. So that's not really the same, is it? So we can't say it is definitely the cell phone. It could be, but it could be something more miraculous, more of a sign before the Day of Judgment that a man's thigh will speak to them. And again, my job is to believe in that. I'm not going to explain to you how it happens. Yani, how often does your thigh speak? What if it's talking too much? But people are always guilty of trying to explain things within our world. There's one hadith that mentioned that there will be people from my ummah who will go to the masajid riding on chariots, or sometimes described as chairs. And some said, well, I've seen handicapped people go to the masjid on a wheelchair. That's something that 1,400 years ago you couldn't imagine. Others said cars. So it could be. But one of the beautiful things about the unseen is that it can always have more than one plausible explanation. I'll give you an example of that. An-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam described a number of scouts that will go to verify certain information. I think we'll get to that later. But the point is that the Prophet ﷺ then swears by Allah that he knows their names and the names of their fathers and the colors of their horses. And Nabi ﷺ mentioned, and this towards the end of time, that they'll be on horses. Something will happen and people will go back. No more guns, or airplanes or tanks. They'll go back to horses and spears and swords. Then they start to speculate here. One famous thing, they say, okay, we're going to run out of oil. When we run out of oil, no more tanks, no more cars, no more planes. So what will happen? You get back on a horse. And they're forgetting about electric cars. They're coming a long way. Ask Tesla. Two, they said, it could be something nuclear, and then it wipes out all technology, blah, blah, blah. And then people go back to horses and knives again. There's not a single gun laying around. Then they said maybe it's something like a solar flare. Solar flare from the sun, a huge one. It will knock out any technological or electronic device on earth. It doesn't have to be a global catastrophe. The scholars mentioned very reasonable, very plausible explanations. One, they said that it could be that there are other weapons and advanced technology and what have you, but the terrain allowed these men to be on horseback. So they said that's another explanation. It doesn't have to be catastrophe, the world starts from zero. The other explanation that scholars mention, they said it could be that they had guns. But the Prophet ﷺ, the lesson was not about the weaponry, the lesson was about what will happen. So the Prophet ﷺ skipped that part and he spoke to them in a language that makes sense to them. What is beautiful about it is that there isn't just one possible explanation. With the unseen, you will find more than one very plausible explanation. And that brings us to another very important rule, and that is, if you ever are listening to anybody and they tell you for a fact this thing that will happen in the future will take place right here, and he gives you latitude and longitude, and they give you the exact date and time, red flag goes up immediately. Something is wrong when someone is telling you about the unseen, which is unknown, in perfect detail. No matter who that speaker is, someone is telling you the future in detail and telling you this is the only explanation, do not listen to that person. The next point is that especially when people cannot understand a sign, they say it's figurative, it's not literal. When you say the Dajjal is not really a person. The Dajjal is a system, the Dajjal is a government, the Dajjal is... But what government, what system? Prophet mentioned his eyes, he mentioned his height, he mentioned his hair, he mentioned his shoulders, his body structure, he mentioned that on his forehead has the words ka, fa, ra. So how can you after all this tell me this is a system? First of all, language is literal. Unless it's clearly, very clearly from the language, figurative, then it's literal. When a Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam speaks about the smoke, he means smoke. It can't be just, you take everything as being figurative. The Dajjal is a system, that's also, there's no evidence for that. Or the barrier of Ya'juj and Ma'juj is figurative. Read Surah Al-Kahf, everything in it is literal. To show you that it's physical, there was actual work that was done, fire that was blown, things that were melted. And then after all this, oh, it's just figurative. That's not how it works. And that's why anyone who says, oh, this is figurative, that is figurative, doesn't really understand how the language works. Not just the Arabic language, but how language works. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purposely gave us a lot of details in some places and few details in other places. And He gave us as much detail as we need. For example, the Mahdi, we have so many details that if anyone says I'm the Mahdi, I can open up the details and say, okay, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this, sorry, you're not the Mahdi. I'll tell you something interesting. After the Mahdi leads that Fajr prayer, and Isa a.s. prays behind him, there is not a single narration about the Mahdi after that. You know why? You don't need to know anything about him after that. The superstar is here. Isa a.s. is here. Nobody cares about the Mahdi at that point. Then certain signs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purposely gave us very little information. Like the beast. Very little information. Or like how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hid the location of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Because guess what would happen if we knew exactly where Ya'juj and Ma'juj were today? We got to liberate these people. They'll give you some rights. Anyways, the companions, when the Prophet mentioned the smoke, some of them said the smoke happened because there was this famine in Mecca, and when the person would come out from the fatigue, everything would be hazy, and it would be as if there is smoke everywhere, but there wasn't smoke. But others believe the smoke is literal because the hadith describes when the believer inhales it or experiences the smoke, they will just get like a sniffles, a runny nose. But the disbeliever will become bloated and their face will become black. So here you see it's something actual and literal. Anyways, in order for us to affirm that this is that sign, it has to fit all the descriptions. I said this earlier with the example of the Mahdi. To tell me you're the Mahdi, you have to fit all the descriptions. The fact that something is one of the signs before the Day of Judgment, it doesn't make it a bad thing. So this actually happened to me in class. Someone came to me and he said, I don't understand why those Arabs keep building skyscrapers. And this is one of the signs before the Day of Judgment. So why do they keep doing that? And of course the answer is that it is not haram. And the fact that it's one of the signs doesn't make it a bad thing. Not every sign before the Day of Judgment is a bad sign. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said towards the end of time, a believer will hardly see a dream except it comes true. Is that a good or bad thing? So that's one of the signs, and it's not a bad thing at all. The Arabs competing in the construction of tall buildings, it's just one of the signs. It's neither bad nor good. So not everything is evil because it's from the signs of the Day of Judgment. What's interesting is that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentions the sign. We cannot link it to something or a specific event that took place, or we say this is it for sure, unless we said it matches all the signs. And then the other thing is that, I'll give you an example. The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned a fire that will erupt in Hijaz. And this actually did happen. It was a volcano that erupted, and anyone who's been to Medina or read the Seerah, you know that the Medina is in a volcanic area. Areas of jagged, rough volcanic rock on the sides of the city. So the Prophet mentioned a fire that will erupt in Hijaz, and its flames will be seen as far as Busra, not Al-Basra, because Al-Basra didn't exist at that time. But Busra is a city in Sham, it's about 100 kilometers away, and literally when that fire broke out or the volcano erupted, people in Busra actually saw the flames. So we know this event took place. And despite that, even then some scholars say it could still happen another time. And that's one of the things about the minor signs, is that some of them will be repeated more than once. Some of them intensify as time goes on. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.